I don't often drink whiskey, but when I do, I drink it neat. And, well, talking about noir and solving crimes. I don't always solve crimes either, but when I do it while drinking whiskey. We've never done a joint book review before.
We have not, but we are buddy reading some crime this year because of my work crime book club. And today we're going to talk about the March pick, which was In a Lonely Place by Dorothy Hughes.
1947, L.A. Noir.
Intro.
I will stop doing the voice.
So we're doing a bit of a theme for every month, and the theme for March was classics of the crime genre, and this was the winner by popular vote. So, like you mentioned, it's an LA noir written by a woman in 1947, which makes it a lot more interesting, to be honest.
Yeah, I'd never actually heard of Dorothy B. Hughes, even though this is a genre that I enjoy. And Penguin are doing these cool little reprints of sort of forgotten classics or lesser known classics. They're also throwing in some well-known book, like Raymond Chandler has one of those editions.
John Le Carré.
John Le Carré.
Yeah.
But they're also reprinting in those green editions some books that maybe have even gone out of print or aren't talked about as much in those circles. So yeah, Dorothy B. Hughes was one that we read together, In a Lonely Place, which coincidentally it was also made into a film in 1950 with Humphrey Bogart, Mr. Noir at the time. But we'll talk a little bit about that as well later, because there are some key differences. But this book, I think we were both shocked. Not shocked, but very, very pleasantly surprised at how, first of all, how well written it was. I wasn't that shocked about how well written it was or how immediately atmospheric, but just how ahead of its time it was as well. This is very feminist noir, written in the 40s, talking about subjects that it went into toxic masculinity, you know, male insecurity and rage, and very competent women highlighting those insecurities and challenging men in very subtle ways, kind of more where the conversation is now than where it would have been in 1947. So we had a great time with this book. Aside from that, it was also just a fun descent into a character's madness.
Yeah, yeah, I think
a journey into a character's descent into madness, what I meant to say.
I think it's a book that if it came out in 2024 and you read it, you would think it's a good book, but nothing that's reinventing the wheel necessarily. What makes it really impressive and interesting is that it was written or published in 1947 and then kind of forgotten about. I think we both went into it wondering if how this would play with the noir aesthetic and stereotypes because it's written by a woman in that time period.
Should we briefly say what it's about?
Yeah. Should I do that?
So we follow Dixon Steele, so they call him Dix for short. A surname is Steele, which is definitely not an accidental funny name.
That was our first hint that she was winking.
Yeah.
At the, I don't think she's winking at the reader. I think she's just winking at someone, but she doesn't expect the reader to get it.
Maybe not at the time.
At the time.
Yeah, maybe not at the time. But Dick Steele is essentially a bit of a waster, kind of on the pretense of wanting to write a crime book of his own. And there's explicit mentions of Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, and this guy goes out to LA from the East Coast.
He's an ex-fighter pilot, so after the war he Yeah.
right after the war, goes out, wants to take a bit of time off and write this book, and his old fighter pilot buddy from the army is a detective, a real dick on the force, and he kind of, I guess, inserts himself into an investigation that's going on at that time of a serial killer, a strangler, roaming the streets at night in LA. And yeah, that's the basic setup.
Yeah, that's the setup. And we went into it with the name of the character, thinking, oh, is this her kind of taking the piss a little bit out of the noir aesthetic, and just by dialing it to 11, is it going to be a little bit satirical, perhaps, and just like using all of the stereotypes? And to an extent, maybe, but I think her point is a lot deeper than that. So we're introduced to this character, Dick Steele, and the first chapter is the most noir thing you've read in your life. Like, I was picturing most parts of this novel while reading it in black and white. I just couldn't help myself.
Yeah.
So it's nighttime in LA. It's foggy. He's crossing the road to a bus stop, and like
she describes headlights and street lamps. And,
yeah. He goes into a bar and he orders a whiskey that he doesn't want, but then he drinks it, and then he orders a second one and he doesn't drink it, but just to order it because
the image,
what you should do.
Yeah.
And he sees this woman waiting at the bus, and he starts thinking about all the ways in which her journey home could go wrong, basically, and how easy it would be for somebody who means her harm to accomplish that. And it kind of sets off some alarm bells, and you think, oh, this guy is kind of a creep.
Yeah.
Bad news. Why are you thinking about these things? And it's not like you're thinking straight away, well, one-dimensional bad guy, because it was written in 1947.
Yeah.
And he would probably be any other given hero of a noir novel, thinking the way he thinks, mostly, and acting the way he does, specifically towards women. And as the book progresses and his facade starts to crumble, we are let deeper and deeper into his real thoughts. And it is kind of fascinating, because she what I got from it is that she's essentially saying, you know, this image that you glorify of the noir, this macho,
the suave
vibe.
The suave, clean cut, freshly pressed suit, glass of whiskey, the whole image of smarm.
Yeah, and she's kind of saying most of them are actually assholes. Like, think about what they're actually doing by presenting us with this guy who is not glorified. And that is basically it. It's a pretty short book. It's like 220 pages.
There's a lot packed into those 228 pages
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
And the mystery itself is quite compelling. Even though you sort of figure out what's going on very early, you're still drawn in by the psychology of the character. And he is quite cleverly paired up with two women characters that really challenge his own image of himself, and they bring out his insecurities, his intense insecurities.
Oh, he's intensely insecure. Yeah. Yeah.
And the fact that those two women characters, so one is the wife of his best friend, the former fighter pilot, and the other one is a neighbor who he kind of feels that he has a charm over. He feels like he's God's gift to women, and he can charm any woman in the room, and he kind of he takes a liking to his friend's wife, and it gives him a sense of power over people, where he's like, I could probably steal your wife. And the neighbor as well, that's living in the apartment complex that he's in, he also immediately thinks, oh yeah, she's totally into me. So he starts to play these women. He thinks he's playing them, and I kind of feel like they're playing him right from the get-go, and both cleverly so. And those interplays between all of them, and then when the three of them are all together, or when the four of them are all together, it's even better. The tension is just heightened, and I feel like that's really what the book is about. Rather than necessarily the mystery itself.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is also, I guess, ahead of its time, because I was expecting a bit more of a sort of a pulpy noir.
Yeah, like a murder mystery kind of
Yeah.
thing with the noir elements, but it very quickly goes from, oh, who did it, to, oh, how are people going to deal with this?
Yeah.
More like that's the question that you're more asking yourself, like how is this going to go, rather than what's going to be the big reveal. What's really interesting about it is that she is at the same time, I think, examining this idea of the suave male figure, but actually beware. Beware, but also you're not as suave as you think you are, on the one side. On the other side, I think she's also kind of presenting us with someone who is deeply insecure, partially because he feels he needs to live up to this stereotype and this image. And I don't really think he's a sympathetic character. Like, I don't sympathize with him or feel for him.
No.
But he is a very sad character. Like, he's a pathetic person who just can't deal with life. And I think partially it's because he feels like he has to do certain things and be a certain way and present this like elaborate facade of what it is to be a man. And that is an extremely modern
It's a very modern
notion.
Yeah, that's a very modern way of thinking. It's just strangely topical.
Yeah.
Even though it was written 80 years ago, or more now even. I can't do maths.
Not quite 80 years ago.
But
77 years ago.
77, thank you for the maths.
You're welcome.
But you think it might be one thing, and you go in expecting one thing. So as she begins to subvert your expectations, to use another modern term, you're still questioning your own belief about what you're reading, which I think is interesting. Just reading it contextually. If a modern reader picks it up and doesn't know anything about it at all, it's just like downloads it, say, digitally, starts reading the ebook, doesn't look at when it's written, but I'm going to read it noir, you may have a different reading experience. But knowing that it was written when it was written, that it's part of this little, oh, they're reprinting these old crime classics, these pulpy noir, let's read a couple, and we're doing the book club, we're going to read an old classic noir. The impact of how she wrote the book just hits you a bit more, thinking about it that way. And it obviously gave us a lot to talk about when we went and did the book club then as well. It was a very discussion-worthy book.
Yeah, for sure.
So much packed into so little. But even with you constantly doubting the main character, even though he's quite openly being very creepy and very intense and not at all behaving in a gentlemanly way, he's behaving in quite a misogynistic way, heavily misogynistic. You still always doubt, oh, did this guy really do the bad thing? And I thought that in itself was very interesting, that she played with that. Like, oh, even though I'm showing you him doing all this stuff and saying all and thinking all this stuff, you're still going to doubt this, because this is not your typical ideal of a man.
And I think when it was written is very important to that, because if it was published today, I would probably not doubt it.
Of course.
But because it was published in 1947, I kept thinking, but would it be this way in the 1940s?
Yeah.
And I can imagine that reading it at the time when it was published, the experience would be even more different in that regard.
Yeah.
And that is what she wanted to do. And what I find very interesting is, going back to the movie, that the movie came out 3 years after the book in 1950, and
they changed fundamentals.
It changes fundamentals of what this story is saying, to the point that I feel like the movie is pointless. Like, the movie is not a real adaptation of this book, because it's completely missing the point.
We'll just say that this guy is no saint, and you questioning whether he's guilty or not is a huge factor of this book. And knowing that he is guilty of very bad things is a huge factor of the book. In the film, they get Humphrey Bogart to play him, and it's 1950, it's the height of noir movies in Hollywood, and he's the good guy. You know, he's the hero of the story. and it fundamentally changes the story. And I think in itself is a very good demonstration of just how ahead of its time
Yeah.
her writing was.
Yeah, and I think it also shows the fact that at the time somebody reading the book would have thought that it's about the, ooh, I don't know how it's going to turn out, and they just thought that they weren't changing anything fundamental by doing that, whereas a modern reader reads it and it does read differently because it's 80 years later. But she's writing about all these things that now have buzzwords like toxic masculinity, honestly, like misogyny in general.
Misogyny, yeah.
But like female friendship and rivalry, and playing with that idea that like women are rivals by default, just because they're women of the same age in the same social circles.
He thinks that he's going to play the two women characters off of each other and make them compete for him, and they end up playing him and sort of beating down his facade.
Yeah. And it's just impressively modern that she's writing about all these things that we talk about now in the last 20 years. Honestly, not even in the last like 15 years. And she wouldn't have had any buzzwords to name them with.
Yeah.
And yet she was presenting us with a situation, a story, and characters that fit those topics extremely well.
Yeah.
Which is very impressive. And on top of that, it's just a really fun noir novel. Like, it's so noir. But like, she is poking fun of it a little bit with love, where I feel like she loves the genre. She does. But she also sees some flaws in it. So she's kind of winking at you with like, you know, it's very foggy. It's very foggy, and there's headlights, but don't forget the fog. And you're like,
don't forget the shadows.
Yeah, the long shadows. Yeah. Everybody's smoking all the time, like a chimney.
And it's heavily descriptive, so just be aware of it if you're going into the book. It's a heavily descriptive book, but it's beautifully written. Like, I think the descriptions are very atmospheric. You really sink into it, and it creates that vibe. It's all about the vibes.
We were talking in the book club as well about how it's kind of hard to believe that this wouldn't have been an inspiration for something like American Psycho. Yeah. That has now just kind of been forgotten about, which is also interesting.
Yeah.
Wonder like why that might be. It's a short book. It's not really about the plot points and what's going to happen. It's more about the experience of reading it, and like the historical context of it is what makes it the most fascinating. And I think I would recommend it to anybody who's into noir for sure. But anybody who's into not just crime, to be honest. I think it's a historical document at this stage.
Explorations of the relationships between men and women.
Yeah.
It's a very feminist book.
Absolutely.
She wrote a feminist novel in 1947 through the lens
of a very male genre.
And it's very noir. She clearly loves it. It's satirical. I think it's a satire, but it's not a humorous satire. It's a criticism.
Yeah. And people at the time missed the point entirely.
100%. Or maybe got it but didn't like it.
Or that.
You know?
Yeah.
So, and it's also like we wanted to do this video together. We've never done a joint book review, but this was just a cool little idea to do that. So it's not really this is a non-spoiler review, go read it. This is a spoiler review. More just a chat of what we thought about this book.
Yeah.
We're not talking about every plot point, so I guess you could call it a semi non-spoiler review, but you get the idea of what the book is about, and you get that idea very early on in the book.
Yeah.
So it's more so a character-driven, character study story. So yeah, if it sounds like it could be of interest, do give it a go. It's the kind of, I guess, more literary crime corner of things. But yeah, contextually when it was written, very, very interesting book. And if you're looking for a little more highbrow crime fiction, absolutely give this a go. It's wonderful.
And give this Penguin Crime Classics series a go, because they've been publishing a lot of these. They're mostly pretty like short, and yeah, they're publishing some really interesting titles. So
also, if you've never read like Raymond Chandler, John le Carré, those other writers, they're republishing those in those little nice editions. It could be a little collector's set for people as well.
Yeah.
Anyway, anything else we want to say, or are we wrapping this up?
I don't think so. I think we have some whiskey to drink.
Cool.
Some rye.
Some rye. He says rye all the time. That's so American.
Yeah. I don't have any cigars, unfortunately, but we'll make do. Let us know if you've actually read this as well. That'd be fun to get somebody else's perspective. And we'll see you soon. Thank you for watching. And subscribe and stuff like that.
I was just going to say, we forgot to do all this.
Yeah.
Like the video if you liked it. If you want to see more of these little joint book reviews, we can continue doing these. And what else? Subscribe and comment and drop some recommendations for us if you know any more books of this nature. And bye.
Bye. See you next time.